watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's see the top stories. Donald Trump says United States is talking to Iran, but it's not ready for deal to end war. Israel says troops launch ground operations against Hezbollah in South Lebanon. And exit polls show nearly 90% of voters support Kazakhstan's new constitution in referendum election. The conflict in the Middle East enters its third week. U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington is in talks with Tehran, but warns Iran is not yet ready to negotiate a truce. Meanwhile, Israel continues strikes against Iranian targets and Hezbollah in Lebanon as casualties rise across the region.
As the conflict in the Middle East enters its third week, US President Donald Trump has signaled that Washington is in talks with Tehran, but says Iran is not yet ready for a deal to end the war. Trump said the Middle Eastern country was pushing for negotiations after outlining the damage he says US and Israeli strikes have inflicted during the conflict.
As far as I'm concerned, we've essentially defeated Iran. I guess they can have a little bit of fight back, but not much. Not much. We've taken out their air forces, we've taken out their navy, we've taken out their air defense, there's no air defense whatsoever. We've taken out their leadership times 2 or 3, might be 3, find out soon. They want to negotiate badly. I don't think they're ready. Just from what I'm hearing, they want to negotiate badly, as they should. But I don't think they're ready to do what they have to do. But I think they will be ready at some point.
Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has dismissed Trump's claim that Tehran wants truce talks, adding that it is not interested in negotiations with the United States. It comes as Iran's Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei calls for compensation from the country's adversaries and warns that failure to do so will result in equal retaliation against what he describes as the enemy's property. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says it has identified more than 1,000 Iranian targets it could potentially strike. The military also says it will continue to carry out attacks in Iran and against Hezbollah in Lebanon until it removes what it considers threats and achieves the objectives of the operation. The statement comes amid reports from Israeli media that Israel and Lebanon are expected to hold talks in the coming days aimed at securing a durable ceasefire that would see the Iran-backed group Hezbollah disarmed. Lebanon was drawn into the war in the Middle East on March 2nd when Hezbollah opened fire on Israel, saying it aimed to avenge the killing of Iran's supreme leader. Lebanese officials say the death toll from ongoing Israeli attacks has risen to at least 850 since the conflict began, with the latest strikes hitting the capital's southern suburbs.
The Israeli army announced on Monday that its troops have begun limited and targeted ground operations against Hezbollah strongholds in southern Lebanon. Israel Defense Forces said on X that forces launched the operations to strengthen the forward defense zone along Israel's northern border. Army added that operations include dismantling the Lebanese group Hezbollah's infrastructure and eliminating its members operating in the area. The military also noted that it will continue operating against Hezbollah. The Israeli military also says it plans to continue its campaign against Iran while preparing to mobilize hundreds of thousands of reservists. Our correspondent Maria Rodriguez Abalde has more from Tel Aviv.
Israeli troops from the 91st Division began targeted ground activity against key Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon as part of an effort to expand the forward defense zone and remove threats to northern Israeli communities. For that reason, Israel's government is preparing to approve the mobilization of up to 405,000 reservists as the request of the IDF. At the same time, the Israeli Defense defense forces told they plan to extend the war in Iran for at least 3 more weeks with the goal of striking thousands of targets that are still pending. But IDF spokesperson stated that as a military, they do not aim to overthrow a regime. The attacks on the Persian Republic do not cease. The IDF estimate that 70% of the missile launchers have been destroyed and more than 100 air defense systems and hundreds of additional detection systems allowing the Air Force to enter and exit Iran without being detected. Iran used its Segil ballistic missile against Israel for the first time. The Segil, with a range of up to 2,000 kilometers and warheads of between 500 and 1,000 kilograms, allows for rapid launches from mobile platforms. The night in center Israel was quiet, but we woke up again with the sound of sirens.
As traffic in the Strait of Hormuz continues to face disruption amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East, U.S. President Donald Trump is now calling on countries to send naval vessels to help police the strait. This comes as some governments remain reluctant to get involved.
US President Donald Trump says his administration is in talks with 7 countries about helping to secure the Strait of Hormuz amid the US-Israeli war with Iran. The strait has seen reduced traffic following Iranian retaliation against ships linked to what it considers its enemies. Trump insists that nations heavily reliant on oil from the Gulf have a responsibility to help protect the waterway.
We are talking to other countries about working with us on the policing of the strait. And I think we're getting good response. If we do, that's great. And if we don't, that's great. We are demanding that these countries come in and protect their own territory because it is their territory. It's a place from which they get their energy. And they should come and they should help us protect it.
Though he declined to identify the 7 governments his administration has contacted, Trump said this weekend he expected many countries would send warships to allow shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, a conduit for 20% of the world's oil. In a social media post, he said he hoped China, France, Japan, South Korea and Britain would participate. Trump also warned against NATO countries failing to assist the United States. China has said it is in talks with all sides involved and called for a de-escalation of the conflict. However, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has refrained from sending warships to the Strait of Hormuz, with authorities considering only the option of deploying drones to search for mines. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi also showed resistance, saying Japan has no plans to dispatch naval vessels to escort ships in the Middle East. Takaichi said her government is currently assessing what steps may be required.
As we have not yet received any such requests, it is difficult for us to respond to hypothetical matters. The Japanese government is currently examining what necessary measures should be taken. Of course, this will be within the Japanese legal framework, but we are proceeding with consideration as to how we can protect the lives of Japanese vessels and their crews, and what can be done in such regards.
France, Germany, Australia and South Korea have also signalled reluctance to answer the US president's demand, as international concern grows that the war could be prolonged indefinitely.
Tensions continue to rise around the Strait of Hormuz after Iran disrupted shipping through the vital oil route. U.S. President Donald Trump has called on allies to help secure the waterway, but Britain has so far stopped short of committing warships. Our correspondent Zeynep Farizadeh has more.
Britain has so far declined to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, despite U.S. President Donald Trump urging allies to help secure the vital shipping route amid the ongoing conflict involving Iran. The U.S. President called on partners, including the UK, France, Japan and South Korea, to deploy naval vessels to protect commercial shipping moving through the narrow waterway. Officials say the UK could instead contribute mine hunting drones and other technology to help address security threats in the area while avoiding direct military escalation with Iran.
Firstly, we are working with others to come up with a credible plan for the Straits of Hormuz to ensure that we can reopen shipping and passage through the strait. Let me be clear, that won't be, and it's never been envisaged to be, a NATO mission. That'll have to be an alliance of partners, which is why we're working with partners both in Europe, in the Gulf, and with the US. It's important that we continue that. It is not straightforward, and you can see that historically when there have been other conflicts that have affected the straits. But I do think that working with others, including the US, is the way to go forward.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer said in a speech today that deciding whether to deploy UK troops is the toughest decision any Prime Minister can face. He added that if forces are sent into harm's way, they must have a clear legal basis and a properly sought out plan. He said the Strait of Hormuz must be reopened to ensure stability in global markets and that the UK is working with allies on a viable plan to restore freedom of navigation in the region. He also insisted the UK will not be drawn into the wider war in the Middle East. The UK Prime Minister spoke by phone with US President Donald Trump on Sunday about the importance of reopening the Strait of Hormuz and restoring global shipping through the waterway. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer met with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney in London on Monday, where the two leaders discussed the ongoing military operations of the United States, Israel and Iran, and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Jennifer Zada, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
The European Union will impose sanctions on 9 people accused of war crimes related to the Bucha massacre in Ukraine. According to French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, the EU are also imposing sanctions against Kremlin propagandists, including Franco-Russian Adrien Bouquet. Barrot made the comments as he arrived at a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Brussels.
Le week-end dernier, sans encombre, les 2600 sanctions.
Last weekend, the 2,600 sanctions imposed since the start of the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine were renewed with no issues. And today in Brussels, 9 new designations of war criminals responsible for the massacre of children, the 4th anniversary of which we will commemorate in a few days, have been added to these 2,600 existing designations and sanctions. Also added to these 2,600 sanctions are 4 sanctions against Kremlin propagandists, including a Franco-Russian, Adrien Bouquet, a veritable recruiter of foreign fighters in Ukraine, responsible for glorifying war crimes. He is also responsible for disinformation campaigns in Europe and Africa.
Responsable aussi de campagnes de désinformation en Europe.
US and Chinese officials have begun a new round of economic and trade discussions in Paris, aimed at easing tensions and preparing the ground for a possible leaders' summit later this year.
Chinese and U.S. officials have begun a new round of economic and trade talks in Paris, aimed at stabilizing bilateral relations and preparing the groundwork for a potential leaders' summit later this year. The meetings are being led by Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and are expected to last around 2 days, with the possibility of further technical negotiations if progress is made. The discussions come as both sides attempt to manage persistent trade tensions while maintaining economic engagement between the world's 2 largest economies. Negotiators are focusing on a range of economic issues, including agricultural, trade, energy imports, aviation purchases, and strategic materials. China has signaled openness to increasing purchases of U.S. farm goods, such as soybeans, poultry, and beef. At the same time, officials are also discussing the possibility of a managed trade framework, where China would commit to purchasing specified volumes of U.S. goods to help narrow the bilateral trade imbalance. Another key topic is supply chain security, especially access to rare earths and other critical materials essential for high-tech manufacturing and defense industries. The talks are also exploring potential mechanisms to manage economic disputes, including proposals for new bilateral structures to facilitate trade opportunities and investment coordination. While no major breakthrough is expected immediately, the Paris meetings are seen as an important step towards reducing economic friction and setting the stage for higher-level dialogue between President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Manu Makhdoom, A News, Beijing.
Washington is sharpening its military focus as strategic rivalry with China intensifies. The new U.S. defense strategy outlines clearer priorities and tougher expectations for partners in Asia. Here is what the shift could mean for regional security.
The United States has unveiled its 2026 National Defense Strategy, and analysts say it marks a major shift in how Washington plans to use its military power. Unlike previous strategies, this one is not just a policy update. Experts say it represents the outcome of a long debate about America's global role and its military limits. An article published in Foreign Policy states that at the center of the strategy is one clear priority: China. Washington now calls China the main challenge shaping US defense planning. Russia is described as a continuing but secondary threat, while North Korea and Iran remain regional concerns. The strategy focuses on four main goals: defending the US homeland, deterring China in the Indo-Pacific, increasing defense contributions from allies, and rebuilding America's defense industry.
Of course, with the president.
Much of the thinking behind the plan comes from Elbridge Colby, the US Undersecretary of Defense for Policy and a key architect of modern US defense thinking. Colby helped shape the 2018 National Defense Strategy and later outlined his ideas in the book The Strategy of Denial. His core argument is simple: the United States does not need to dominate every region of the world, but it must stop any rival, especially China, from controlling Asia. The strategy therefore puts the Indo-Pacific at the center of US military planning. A key focus is the so-called First Island Chain, a line of islands stretching along East Asia that analysts see as crucial for limiting China's military expansion. This approach also changes expectations for US allies. Countries located near this strategic line, such as South Korea and the Philippines, are expected to strengthen their own defenses and play a more active role in regional security. The strategy keeps some flexibility in other areas. Southeast Asian states and partners like India may still maintain economic ties with China, but security choices that weaken the regional balance will face stronger pressure from Washington. Analysts say this new doctrine brings greater clarity to US strategy, but it also carries risks. Allies that are used to flexibility may resist stricter expectations, especially if greater military spending or political commitments are required. In short, the United States is making a clear strategic bet: concentrate power in Asia, rely more on partners, and prevent China from dominating the region. Whether that strategy succeeds may depend not only on China, but also on how America's allies respond.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the deepening crisis in the Strait of Hormuz and whether a proposed naval coalition can secure this vital energy route. Stay tuned. Welcome back to News. The top story for discussion: the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is deepening as the war between United States, Israel and Iran continues to disrupt one of the world's most critical energy routes. Nearly 20% of global oil and gas shipments pass through the narrow waterway, but attacks on tankers and rising military tensions have brought traffic to a near halt, sending global energy prices sharply higher. U.S. President Donald Trump is now urging allies to send warships to help secure the strait, warning that NATO could face a very bad future if partners fail to act. Yet several countries remain cautious about joining a military coalition, raising questions about whether such a plan is realistic or whether diplomacy may offer a better path. To discuss the geopolitical and security implications of the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, we're joined by Nuno Martins, a political analyst speaking to us from Lisbon, Portugal. Mr. Martins, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure.
Mr. Martins, how serious is the current disruption in the Strait of Hormuz for the global economy and energy markets?
Well, it's serious because the prices are rising. Mm-hmm. The delivery of the products are taking time. It's dangerous for the ships to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, and it's important to contain the situation. On one hand. On the other hand, this is the way that Iran found in order to try to impeach the war against the country, against the regime. And it's a way that they feel it's feasible to do. So in that sense, it has to be solved. It cannot last forever. It has to be solved quite quickly. Mm-hmm. But we have also to say that most probably you have other ways to counter to this, because As you may know, you can have pipelines in Saudi Arabia or even in Oman. The question is how these pipelines can be a solution, at least in the short term, to solve the issue.
President Donald Trump is calling for several countries to send warships. How realistic is the formation of such a naval coalition?
Well, I'm not sure it's about the coalitions. I'm probably sure it's about a way of protecting the boats to cross the Hormuz Strait. And in that sense, the question is, which coalition are we talking about? Which countries are we talking about? And it's quite interesting that President Trump has announced and has requested also to China on one hand, because China receives 90% of its oil from Iran. And China clearly is entering into a trap, because either they will say yes and then they will drop Iran and the regime, either they will say no, but they will have to face the consequences, and it will show to the rest of the world that the Chinese are not taking care of basically they just want to take care of their own interests on one hand. On the other hand, you have the question regarding NATO. Also, the question regarding the feasibility of the shipping from European member states to go and to help. We have to check exactly what are the capabilities, what are the possibilities, and you have also to consider another thing, which is the new type of warfare that we are facing nowadays, which makes all of the traditional warfare a little bit weak compared to the drones and to the attacks that can come from Iran in the future.
Mr. Martins, from a military standpoint, how difficult would it be to secure the strait against missiles, drones and naval mines?
So that's exactly the thing. That's what you saw in Ukraine. That's what you see now with the defense from the Iranian regime, which is this new type of capability of warfare. It's quite easy to transport, it's quite easy to hide, and it's quite easy to send with certain stuff inside it, like the missiles or whatever, that they can clearly resist to attacks from the traditional warfare. So this is on one hand. On the other hand, the real question is, if this continues, what will be necessary to stop it? And the question is going to be boots on the ground. And boots on the ground where? Nobody's going to put boots on the ground on a territory as vast as Iran on one hand. Nobody's going to put boots on the ground on a territory with so much population as Iran is. But I do see that boots on the ground on specific issues like the island in the Strait of Hormuz, or even the Strait of Hormuz, that could protect the strait from this new type of warfare that is sent by the Iranian forces.
So, in your view, could Iran realistically sustain a blockade of the waterway for a prolonged period?
It will depend. On one hand, it will depend how the facility and the capability of the Iranian forces will hold and how much they will receive from now on. We could see that, for instance, in the case of Hamas and Hezbollah, despite the destruction that they faced, in both cases, they still managed to have some material that they were receiving even after the war in Gaza, for instance, in the case of Hamas. So the question is exactly that. If someone is willing to give the Iranian regime the capability to continue this type of attacks, they will continue. And then that will be the question, where we are going to face a wider war, or if it's going to be only located in this specific region.
So what risks would a multinational naval operation face if it tried to escort commercial ships through the strait?
Well, the first risk is obviously the security of the ships themselves, meaning that they will be easily attacked by the Iranian forces, and this will have consequences on one hand. The second hand is, as I said before, if the capability of the Iranian forces will be renewed with new material made or transported from outside Iran, it will have to be seen who is going to do that, and if it is going to spread into a wider war. On the other hand, it is true that if the ships cannot pass, especially for the Indo-Pacific Ocean, then the situation might be aggravating as well. I do believe that at the end of the day, I think that nobody's going to save the regime, and I think that the capabilities, at least we have indications on that, will be destroyed or will be diminished, and it will be basically weaker for the Iranian forces to counterattack what they're still doing at this moment.
Mr. Martins, could the crisis push major Asian economies like China, Japan, and South Korea to play a larger security role in the region?
So this is exactly one of my points that I think that the coalition of the willing that everybody talks about, what Canadian Prime Minister Carney said about the medium and the small states. But here I have another type of coalition, which is the conservative coalition. You are facing in the world, especially in Latin America, in Japan, in South Korea, a kind of alliance with President Trump and the Trump administration, especially an ideological alliance. And I wouldn't be surprised that especially Japan will join forces in order to fight the Iranian regime, on one hand. On the other hand, the recent declarations, if I'm not mistaken, at least they were taken by the New York Times, saying that the Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, is supporting the attacks, the American attacks against the Iranian regime, also enforces this idea that this coalition of the willing might join forces in the region in order to tackle the regime and to finish with it as soon as possible.
So, does this crisis reshape the broader strategic connection between the Middle East and the Indo-Pacific?
In my view, yes. In my view, yes. And in my view, it's about the wave, the political wave we are seeing in the world, with the exception of Europe. It's also a fact that the decision by the certain countries to create the famous BRICS has become a disaster, because this is basically erasing those BRICS to exist. If you see the fact, and I haven't arrived yet to the Indo-Pacific, but the fact that in Cuba the regime might fall as well and go into an alliance with the United States, this will push other countries in the region to support this. And with the economic pressure from the rising of prices and the cost of living, this will also help, in my view, certain countries to go with the Americans and to push further to tackle the regime as soon as possible.
And finally, what realistic off-ramps exist to prevent the conflict from escalating further?
The question about escalating is not about escalating itself, it's about what you mean by escalating. Are we meaning escalating because the war has escalated already naturally to the neighborhood countries with the attacks from the Iranian regime to its neighborhood countries, despite the fact that the Iranian narrative is that they are not attacking the neighborhood countries, which is completely fake. But the question is, if these countries are going to attack or not the Iranian regime. The escalation, when we talk about escalation, I believe the idea behind escalation is to make a war which is completely local and to spreading the war a little bit wider, and then to have countries against countries. But I don't see here that there is no possibility for the neighborhood countries to go with Iran against the United States. I see the opposite. I see those neighborhood countries, as I said before, which are asking the Americans to tackle stronger the Iranian regime, to go against the Iranian regime. And I don't see any other country in the region, despite maybe some people in Afghanistan or in Pakistan who can support the regime, that they will do that with the Iranians. So the escalation itself, to answer your question, will be seen as an escalation of willing against the Iranian regime, rather than a war that will make countries against countries, in my view, and eventually in a third world war.
Nuno Martins, thank you very much for sharing your insights and helping us better understand the stakes in the Strait of Hormuz crisis. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Now, after the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. As the conflict continues to escalate, residents in Iran's capital Tehran are sharing their views on the war and its possible outcome. While daily life in the city continues, many people say the situation has brought uncertainty and tension as the fighting enters another week.
17 days into the escalating Middle East conflict, Tehran has been repeatedly targeted by strikes, bringing the reality of the war directly to Iran's capital. With uncertainty growing and no clear end in sight, the conflict is weighing heavily on the country and its people. For many residents in Tehran, the hope is that the conflict will eventually give way to a settlement that prevents further escalation and brings long-term stability to the region. Tehran bookseller Ali Akbar Hosseini said he believes the conflict should not end on terms imposed from outside powers.
We did not start this war in order to grant a ceasefire. If they want a ceasefire, they must grant it, because they brought their equipment from the other side of the world to this side of the world. Thank God, we are in our own home and defending it.
He also argued that Iran's political future, if it were ever to change, should be determined by the Iranian people themselves.
Their intention is to change our system, and I consider such a thing unlikely. This depends on the people, whether they want it or not. If the people want this, there is no need for war. They can easily hold a referendum and determine whether they want it or do not want it.
Some in Tehran say any end to the conflict must come with guarantees that the fighting will not simply return months later.
We definitely want the war to end, but not so that 6 months later it starts again. The war must advance to a point that creates a settlement so that the same situation doesn't repeat.
He also voiced skepticism about the intentions of foreign powers involved in the conflict.
Every foreign country is only after taking the interests of our country. This is very obvious. It can be oil, firstly oil. There are also other issues, like the same thing they did with Venezuela. But our nation is a nation that will stand firm until the shadow of war is lifted from the country.
Iranian humanitarian authorities say the war is having a severe impact on civilian infrastructure and daily life across the country. According to the organization, around 29,000 homes outside Tehran and 10,000 residential units in the capital have been affected. Thousands of commercial properties have also reportedly been damaged.
Sweden has temporarily relocated its diplomatic operations from Tehran to Baku following a deterioration in the security situation in Iran. Swedish Foreign Minister Maria Malmer Stenergard confirmed the decision on her X account, explaining that embassy staff have been evacuated from Tehran while the mission continues to operate from Azerbaijan's capital. She stressed that the security situation in Tehran remains highly uncertain. Georgia's government is pushing back against the latest resolution from the European Parliament. Officials in Tbilisi say the document is detached from reality and question Brussels' authority to judge the country's internal politics. Our Nini Nikolashvili brings us more from Tbilisi.
The strongest reaction to the latest resolution of the European Parliament came from Georgia's foreign minister. Maka Bacharishvili dismissed the document, saying European Parliament resolutions on Georgia have long been detached from reality. Her argument went farther than just disagreement with the text itself. She suggested that lawmakers in Brussels have no responsibility for the country's internal political decisions, and therefore their assessments cannot be treated as authoritative. The resolution adopted on March 12 by 438 votes to 37 calls for the immediate release of opposition politician Eleni Khoshdari and others detained for what European lawmakers describe as politically motivated reasons. It also raises concerns about former President Mikhail Saakashvili's continued imprisonment and deteriorating health, and calls for investigations into allegations of ill treatment of detainees and reports about the use of chemical agents against protesters. Beyond individual cases, the document criticizes laws adopted by the government, including the transparency of foreign influence law and the law on family values and protection of minors, arguing that they restrict political activism, civil protest, and freedom of expression. Government officials responded not only to the criticism itself, but also to the legitimacy of the institution making it. Parliamentary Speaker Shavkat Papashvili compared the debate in the European Parliament to the Soviet Congress of People's Deputies, saying the tone of the discussion resembled political attacks against Georgia during the late Soviet period. These reactions illustrate how relations between Tbilisi and European institutions have shifted from policy disagreements to a deeper political confrontation. Since 2024, disputes over democratic reforms, legislation, and Georgia's EU integration path have repeatedly escalated. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Armenia's justice minister says the draft of the country's proposed new constitution has been completed. Justice Minister Serbuhi Galyan said the draft will be reviewed by the ruling Civil Contract Party and its parliamentary fraction before any decision on publication. The issue is closely tied to Armenia-Azerbaijan negotiations, with Baku calling for the removal of constitutional references it says imply territorial claims. A referendum on possible changes is expected around 2026 or 2027. Kazakhstan has announced preliminary results of a nationwide referendum on a new constitution. According to the Central Referendum Commission, a majority of voters supported the proposal, which introduces changes to around 84% of the constitution. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina reports from Almaty.
87.15% of voters in Kazakhstan supported the adoption of a new constitution in a nationwide referendum. The preliminary results were announced by Kazakhstan's Central Referendum Commission. According to the Commission, more than 9 million people took part in the vote, representing 73.12% of eligible voters. Under national legislation, a referendum is considered valid if at least half of eligible voters participate. After the vote, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev met with representatives of youth organizations. He said he had reviewed the constitutions of many countries and believes Kazakhstan's updated basic law ranks among the most progressive. The president also announced that from now on, March 15th will be marked as Constitution Day, the country's main legal document. Later, speaking to journalists, Tokayev said the next presidential election in Kazakhstan will take place in 2029 in accordance with the current constitution. Responding to speculation about the possible transfer of power and the creation of a vice presidential position, he said such discussions are ongoing, but there is no reason for concern. The president also announced that parliamentary elections will be held this summer as Kazakhstan prepares to transition to a unicameral parliament known as the Kurultai. These changes are also included in the new constitution. According to Tokayev, the country now faces a significant amount of work following the vote. The changes affect around 84% of the constitution, making it the most extensive revision of Kazakhstan's basic law since the independence. The Central Referendum Commission will finalize the results at a separate meeting, with the official outcome to be published in the media no later than March 21st. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Uzbekistan's plans to build its first nuclear power plant were discussed with the International Atomic Energy Agency. The talks come as IAEA mission prepares to visit the country to review the progress of the project. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova has more from Tashkent.
An International Atomic Energy Agency mission is expected to visit Uzbekistan in the second half of 2026 to assess progress on the country's first nuclear power plant project and review the development of national nuclear infrastructure. Uzbekistan's nuclear energy program was discussed recently during a meeting between the director of Uzbekistan's Atomic Energy Agency, Azim Akhmadkhodjaev, and the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi. Uzbekistan plans to build its first nuclear facility in the Jizakh region, where an integrated nuclear complex is expected to include both large-scale capacity reactors and small modular reactors.
The project's first stage involves constructing a 330-megawatt small nuclear power plant with 6 reactors, each capable of generating 55 megawatts of electricity. The first reactor is expected to begin operations around 2029. In the longer term, the project may expand to include 2 large VVER 1000 reactors, bringing the total generating capacity of the sites to more than 2.1 gigawatts. At the same time, Uzbekistan is expanding international cooperation on the project. The national agency Uzatom has recently discussed partnership with the French nuclear engineering company Framatome, focusing on advanced automated control systems designed to improve the safety and reliability of future reactors. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
China says it's stepping up diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions between Afghanistan and Pakistan after clashes escalated along their shared border. Beijing has now dispatched its special envoy to mediate between the two sides as fighting and airstrikes have raised fears of further instability in the region. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has held a phone conversation with Afghanistan's Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi as Beijing pushes for de-escalation between Afghanistan and Pakistan. According to China's Foreign Ministry, Beijing's special envoy on Afghan affairs is currently traveling between Afghanistan and Pakistan in an effort to mediate and encourage dialogue between the two neighbors. China says it hopes both sides will remain calm and exercise restraint, urging Kabul and Islamabad to hold face-to-face talks as soon as possible. Beijing is also calling for an early ceasefire and for both countries to resolve their disputes through dialogue rather than further military action. The Chinese government says it stands ready to continue playing a constructive role in easing tensions and helping facilitate reconciliation between the two countries. The diplomatic push comes at a time of rising violence along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Clashes intensified over the weekend with reports of airstrikes and cross-border fighting, raising concerns about a further escalation between the two sides. As tensions remain high along the border, regional countries are increasingly attempting to step in diplomatically in hopes of easing tensions and preventing further conflict between the two neighbors. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss Kazakhstan's constitutional referendum and the political reforms introduced by Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. See you shortly.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to news. Kazakhstan has approved a new constitution in a nationwide referendum with more than 87% of voters backing the changes and turnout exceeding 73%. The reforms initiated by Kassym-Jomart Tokayev restructured the country's political system, introducing a unicameral parliament, restoring the post of vice president and expanding presidential authority over key appointments. While the president says the reforms will modernize governance, critics argue they could further consolidate executive power. To discuss the implications of these constitutional changes and what they mean for Kazakhstan's political future, we are joined by Dimash Aljanov, a political analyst, speaking to us from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Mr. Aljanov, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mr. Aljanov, first of all, how significant is this constitutional referendum for Kazakhstan's political system? And nearly 90% of voters supported the reforms. How should we interpret this level of support?
Well, first of all, Kazakhstan is an autocracy. You should consider that there is no free elections and there is no free procedures where the citizens can really vote and show their support in favor or not. So having in mind that the referendum was controlled by the government, you see these quite usual numbers for the Central Asian region when the autocracy is either on the presidential, the parliamentary elections, or on referendums show enormous number of support. So this is due to the weak legitimacy of the current regime. So they needed to show it in this way, unfortunately.
So the new constitution replaces the bicameral parliament with a unicameral system. What impact could this have on legislative checks and balances?
Well, again, so we have the current constitution with enormous powers of the president. And the new constitution even more vested additional powers to the president against the parliament. So we see that he can now legislate without any serious constitutional checks. So he can basically rule by decrees. So his decrees can be have power of the law or the constitutional law. So I'm afraid there is some transitional articles in the constitution that pushes the dissolution of the parliament by the 1st of July. So in the time where there's no parliament, based on the new constitution, the president will adopt the new legislation through his decrees, because the adoption of the new constitution will inevitably push the cascade of the legislative changes in the Kazakhstan. So they should harmonize the national legislation. So, and in this case, the society will have a little power just to see what kind of changes will be in the national legislation. So all in all, as you mentioned in your report, that the president now can appoint the key figures in the system of the government without or with a minimal participation of the parliament. And in addition to that, he is creating additional non-parliamentary body, People's Council. The whole members of this council will be appointed by the president, and this council will be empowered to initiate referendums or other legislations.
Mr. Aljanov, the post of vice president has been restored after being abolished in 1996. Why is this position being brought back now?
So it's widely seen as a new mechanism of a power transition. So in the case, again, we are not talking that it's going to happen in the nearest future, but in the case the president wants to appoint his loyal and trusted person as his successor, now he can do it through the vice president position. So and the whole, again, in the democratic countries, even within the semi-presidential systems, you know that the, usually vice president is elected together with the president, but in our case, the vice president is appointed by the president. And if the parliament will not agree with his appointment twice, repeatedly, the president has power to dissolve the parliament. So, and there is no, again, we don't see real constitutional checks on this matter.
So a new advisory body, the People's Council, will also be created. What role could this institution play in Kazakhstan's political landscape?
So the whole idea comes from the beginning of 90s when the President Nazarbayev dissolved the first democratic or more independent parliament in 1993, and to adopt the new constitution that again empowered him personally, he used the People's Assembly of Kazakhstan, so a non-constitutional body that initiated the referendum. In this case, they trying to constitutionalize this body, and on the basis of the People's Assembly of Kazakhstan, to create this People's Council. Once again, all members will be appointed by the president, so you shouldn't expect that these people will show their political independence in decision making.
And how have political parties, civil society groups, and the opposition responded to these constitutional changes?
In Kazakhstan, there is no legal opposition, so legal oppositional political parties are not allowed, so they're not registered. We have the political environment with intensive pressure on any kind of political activism, so those marginalized groups are, and not only them, but I think the biggest part of the majority of the society also were against these constitutional amendments, by understanding what they are trying to cover up by stating the parliamentary reform at the beginning and just by the end announcing that they're going to change the whole constitution, which is trying to cover again the idea of empowering of the president. So people were against, the critics were detained. One of the prominent speakers was arrested for 2 months. The authorities opened the criminal case against him. So these all examples of the constant and systematic pressure on the society, and specifically on those who were against the government and government policy. And more surprising, we now also see the Russian practices when the people were sanctioned for the social media posts with the criticism.
And finally, how might these changes influence Kazakhstan's international image, especially regarding governance and democratic reforms?
So as long as the democratization, human rights is no longer in the agenda in international relations, so the Western countries and specifically United States are no longer pushing this in its bilateral relations with other countries, it's very favorable political climate that for the autocracies to push further and to shrink the space for the society, for the political activism or any kind of serious political activities in the country. So I think that by understanding this, Kazakh authorities utilizing this opportunity and moving the Kazakhstan much closer to the Russia and Belarus, we can say so.
Dimash Khazanov, thank you very much for talking to A News. We appreciate your time and perspective. Thanks a lot. Thank you. This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned to A News for more updates.